Yeah, it's time for The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents. And with us this week, journalist Craig Capidis, author of Mona Lisa's Pajamas. Welcome, sir.
Hello.
Also with us, correspondent for Dutch radio RTL4, Stefan de Vries. Your latest book, it's in Dutch. Remind us again the title.
Under My Soles in English, but Under Mijn Zolen, about the Arab Spring.
Okay, all about the Arab Spring. Celestine Bowen, freelance reporter, always welcome. And Anthony Bélanger, who hosts Le Blogueur on Franco-German television station Arte. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
And we want to thank you for your feedback throughout the week on The World This Week's Facebook page and on Twitter. You can follow us at FrancoisF24. Now, is it all his fault? The captain of a mega cruise liner in the dock after steering the boat too close to the Italian shore. He allegedly triggered a disaster with dozens dead or missing, not to mention a major threat to the ecology of the Tuscan coastline. Now, there's growing evidence of what went wrong before, during, and after the accident.
No, per cortesia, lei adesso prende e va a bordo. Mi assicuri che sta andando a bordo. Io sto andando qua con la lancia dei soccorsi, sono sotto qua, non sono andato da nessuna parte, sono qua. Che sta facendo, comandante? Sto qua per coordinare i soccorsi. Che sta coordinando lì? Vado a bordo, mi coordini i soccorsi da bordo. Lei si rifiuta? No, ma si rende conto che è buio e che qua non vediamo nulla. E che vuole tornare a casa, Schettino? È buio, vuole tornare a casa?
All right, and in Italy, T-shirts that quote the Italian Coast Guard's words that you just heard there to the captain, "Get back on board." They're selling like hotcakes. Of course, Stefan de Vries, this is of course, he's not been proved guilty, and that's important because whenever there's a major accident, the first thing people do is blame the captain.
Yeah, well, that's his role. That's why he's the captain. So he's responsible whether he's guilty or not. And of course, there are all kinds of rumors coming out now and details of what exactly happened that night. And it's quite astonishing what he actually did or didn't do.
Oh, didn't do, yes.
And so yeah, well, I guess he's not the right man on the right position.
The worst captain I've ever heard in my entire life as a journalist. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he's guilty or not. But it's one of the worst story of captain I've ever heard. I mean, every details of what he's done. He was waiting outside the boat, during the night.
Worse than the skipper on Gilligan's Island. This is like a Gilligan's Island
It could be a Conrad novel,
Well, the thing about this, there's all these little vignettes they're coming out, but the one that really dropped my jaw was this report that after the ship had hit the rocks and started to sink, he's ordering dinner with some Tootsie from Russia up on the bridge.
Yes, I've heard that. I heard
that one. I think that was before he got into the lifeboat.
But the ship hits is going down. He says, "I'll have dinner, please."
Yeah, another drink, another martini.
No, but I mean, what is amazing about it is that everybody on that table, everyone knows exactly what to do. If you were a captain, if you have that kind of situation, you know that you don't have to. I mean, to get out of the boat, it's the single rule. Right. Everybody knows all over the world, and it's exactly what he did. Well, apparently.
All right, but some, by the way, are defending him at least slightly on our Facebook page. They agree the nautical charts could have or were indeed off. For others, though, Alexander from Paris reminding us it's the 100th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. He should have acted like Captain Edward John Smith, who was and still is a hero to all Brits. He appears, Captain Smith, to have made no attempt to save himself. His body, if recovered, was never identified.
And the worst thing is that he's a caricature of an Italian in some ways, Well, it's exactly the kind of...
Because I think what's happening is that, and there was an article about this today, but that, the guy on the Coast Guard, the guy on the other end of the line, has turned into the hero. So it's actually the two Italys.
Yes,
Monty,
exactly,
Berlusconi...
Right.
Good guy, serious, do your job, get back on board.
And the captain was from Naples, the southern part of Italy.
But does anyone, people who are watching who are sailors, and I've been on some sailboats. I'm not a registered skipper, but I've done some big crossings on sailboats. And the most important thing, even if you're like the fourth mate on a dinky sailboat, is you need to know your charts. And if you look at those charts that are there, you wouldn't take a 20-foot catch in there, let alone this gigantic, essentially an oil tanker with people on board, that close to shore where there are shoals.
No, everything's
It's
obvious in that story.
You don't do that.
Okay, I'm gonna
Everything's
I'm gonna
obvious in
try
that
to
story.
rally you, Anthony Bélanger here. This has been throwing the spotlight on an industry that once seemed like it was dying. We can call up the numbers. Not many people went on cruises anymore in the 1970s. 500,000.
Yeah.
It grew to 5 million in 1990 and to around 19 million in 2010. And it's going to keep growing as Europe's population ages. Now, to meet demand, the ship sizes, they've grown. They now have swimming pools, restaurants, movie houses, discotheques. They're like floating cities. And there are questions of, was this boat, which is the biggest of its fleet, too big?
Yeah, there was a kind of a beginning of polemics, just before that story, with those huge boats coming, just
Venice.
going to Venice, because they were approaching Venice too close, and they were moving a lot of. So yes, they are like cities on sea. Really, I don't know if you've ever seen those boats. I've seen several ones in Athens, for example, where I used to go for my holidays, and they're huge, and even more than that. So of course you've got several questions about those boats, and the real thing is that what is important about those boats is that they are selling security, and the main thing that they are selling to cruisers is security. They're saying basically that you've got plenty of countries, beautiful countries all over the world, but they can set a revolution. You can have problems. You can be robbed. In those places, in those boats, you're safe, absolutely safe. Well, it's no longer the case, as far as I know.
And the other thing that seems to be coming out is that the people who don't actually have much recourse, when you sign the contract, you actually are not allowed to enter into a class action suit. I mean, they protect themselves far better, it would appear, than airlines
It could just be the beginning of litigation. I want to move on to litigation on a grander scale now. You remember the last chance European summit. It was in December, and maybe it didn't save the world, but it did earn this old continent a bit of a breather over Christmas and New Year's. Well, the break is over. Over in Athens, the Troika, that is negotiators from the IMF, the EU, the European Central Bank, they're back in town. And while we do sometimes oversell EU summits, there's no denying, Craig Kapitas, that these are crunch talks.
No, they are. If Greece doesn't, if the bondholders don't take the haircut, if Greece doesn't take the haircut.
Explain exactly what a haircut means, because we bandy the term about.
Okay.
You don't need one.
I don't know. Thank you. By the way, that's very kind of you. So, no, a haircut is that a certain Greece has to owes its bond. Bondholders are owed a certain amount of money, but they're saying, okay, bondholders, you have to take a haircut and only accept X% of what you're getting. And at the same time, the Greeks take a haircut by chopping their expenditures. And you put all this in a mix, and the guys with the numbers figure out, these numbers are coming just out of the sky because I don't have the exact Greek stats in front of me here, but it basically means if Greece owes, let's say, make it easy, $1 trillion, 300 million. Now, because of these haircuts, you're only going to really owe on the date when the interest and principal comes due, say only 50 million. So people are taking a loss, or 50 billion. You're taking a loss.
And is it people that are going to be taking a loss this time around, or is it governments?
It's the banks basically who are taking loss.
Half of them are Greek banks.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
and it's not even sure that the banks really will accept this haircut, because that was the deal on not the previous summit, but the one before that in October. The banks allegedly agreed to take a haircut of 50% because Angela Merkel forced them to. And now they're coming back on this haircut, and now the negotiations are still going on in Greece. And apparently they have an agreement tonight, we'll know the details.
But
this
what's
weekend.
going-
Time is money in that matter. So
But Francois, what's going on here is
a month ago is not okay right now. I mean, they're asking for more.
It's something much more fundamental going on here behind the scenes, which we've seen. And this is the key to it. You are seeing a battle royal between government and the private sector. The government, Greece and the EU, want to keep Greece as a member of the EU for political reasons. It makes a lot of sense.
The Eurozone.
The Eurozone. Yeah. Okay, this is a political decision. What the market is saying is, to hell with this. Get them out of the Eurozone. This is bad for business. Let them go back to the drachma. Now, a few days ago, I happened to have lunch with some senior Greek officials here in Paris, politicians. And they are furious over anyone who listens to the market side of this argument. This stat you have up here on the screen, these traders. Mm-hmm. These are the fellows who want to see Greece default. Why? Because they're positioned to make money if it succeeds or if it fails.
Of course.
And that's
they don't like this
they've bet on failure.
That's right. That's it. And this is the argument that's going on. Mm-hmm. And if Greece goes drachma, which in my opinion I think it will, because I hope I'm wrong, but I think market forces always win out. That in this argument, that the people who control the markets, the banks, the hedge funds are going to win. I hope that's not the case. But the animosity between these two sides is palpable.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right. And what happens also is that, there is a second market for foreign or for sovereign debts. And a lot of them bought Greek debts for nothing, for something like 20% of his face value. So they don't want the Greek debt to be devaluated 70 or 80% because it's the price they paid already for that debt. So they want to earn money. With an haircut at 50% will be perfect for them because they would earn something like between 20 and 30%.
But it's basically a mistake of the European Union because the debt is 360 billion. Sounds like a lot of money, but it's nothing. If we really wanted to bail them out, we could do that this afternoon.
And could have done it.
And we could have
done much before.
2 years ago.
But
Angela Merkel, she pushed on the PSI, the private sector involvement, and there was a real...
Celestine Boland, you remember when the crisis first hit back in 2008? We thought, okay, we're going to now have a real rethink about the rules of banking. Did you at the time think it would happen?
I mean, I think, for the same reason that we were saying, I mean, the private, sector is a powerful force. And when it comes down to it, as we've seen in the United States and the UK, the city, we saw that this, I'm sorry to move the debate to another subject, but when the British walked out of the talks at that summit, the whole reason was because they didn't want to disappoint the city. They wanted and so basically the city ruled, which is to say, the British Wall Street. So I mean, I just think that the problem is, yes, there have been changes. To be honest, I can't give you the sort of chapter and verse of what has been changed, but I mean, in many, we see the resistance to precisely the financial transactions.
And I want, just before we go on, I just one more comment on Greece. Craig Kapidis on Twitter, one comment from Teacher Dude. He says, Greece spends billions on U.S. jets to protect itself from Turkey, which buys its jets from U.S. Lockheed, is laughing all the way to the bank.
Which is stupid because they're spending something like 6% of their GDP in defense, which
your
is
Twitterati
amazing.
Contributor is absolutely right. This goes back to the whole fallacy of the economic strategies in many of European Union countries. That when you look at it very briefly, when you look at a solution for a problem of this scale, there's various levels within the argument that you look to solve. When we've talked about this before, what can fix this is nothing short of an elemental root and branch shift of how capitalism operates. Capitalism operates on two principles in the real market, and only two. From unemployment to whatever else you want to talk about in business, it all hinges on two things: tax rates and interest rates. Mm-hmm. And until governments and politicians, and I have no idea how to actually go about doing this, but to actually sit down and figure out a way to recalculate, redefine, in essence, tax rates and interest rates, this type of problem is going to continue. That's the whole underlying concept, the foundation of all business. What your tax rate is, what your interest rate is. That's why people hire people. That's why companies fire people.
But may I just add something about Greece? I'm not that pessimistic as you are. I think that Greece will remain in the European Union and will go on with the euro, because it's a big decision to take for the European Union than to give up Greece. You're right saying that you've got a battle between, on one hand, the markets, and the other hand, the politicians. And I think at the very end, that's a moment of reckoning, a very important moment for our history. And I think that the politicians will prevail for the very first time in, let's say, 10 or 20 years. I'm that optimistic.
All right, Stefan de Vries, before we go to the break, your prediction.
I'm also optimistic, but it will be a very long road, and we're not going to win it with the people who are now the captains on this sinking ship.
Celestine Boland?
Let's say.
I also think, I mean, the implications for very many people in very powerful countries, actually, of Greece's moving out of the euro is just too great, and therefore they'll do everything to prevent it. The question is whether what they do to prevent it will be worse than just letting it go.
I hope they're right. I hope my colleagues are right, and perhaps my analysis here comes from way too many years of covering the markets and how these rich and powerful people manipulate them. But I hope you're right, because it should be a political decision.
All right, a jaded Craig Kopidis there versus the rest of the panel. When we come back, we're going to stick to this topic and talk about the pronouncements this week of the new Italian premier. Been a bit feisty. We'll hear what he has to say. Stay with us. It's The World This Week.